Welcome to Coffee and Contemplation. I'm Robin.
I'm Heidi.
And today we'll be discussing Chapter 9, The Gate. Together! Woohoo! Today's coffee, I'm drinking Starbucks dark roast. Again, like I said, I like me a dark roast. But I'm drinking it from the absolute coolest Nightmare Before Christmas mug that I got from Moonlit Wonderland on Etsy. One word, Moonlit Wonderland. I don't know, I love it. It's so cool. The picture of it, it's hard to describe, but it's sort of like in the style of those like fake products that you see like from different fandoms. And yeah, it says Jingle Juice on it with Jack holding a steaming mug of I presume some twisted version of hot chocolate and a candy cane sticking out of it. It's really, really cool. So the picture of it will definitely be on the Instagram.
I am drinking Dunkin' Decaf, and I'm drinking it from a like 90s style tall Christmas coffee mug. It's got like a drawing of a reindeer with ornaments hanging off of its antlers.
And now that we've acquired coffee, let's proceed with contemplation. As promised, Heidi has returned.
I am here.
As we said back when we did our announcement, you've been watching the episodes with me.
Yeah.
So you're all up to speed. It commences with the actual reunion between Mike and Eleven.
Yeah.
We got the tease of it at the end of chapter 8, but then it's a very soft fade in, and the first thing you see is them embracing. And I don't know about you, but I love this reunion. I love it so much. It's so beautifully done.
Yeah, and I think it's actually pretty brave to cut that reunion in half between episodes. I think a more traditional way to edit that might have been like to have the door open and we see her face and then nothing else, and then it just drops. To have like her walk in and have everybody react to her and then cut and then open again in the same moment without necessarily making it feel like the moment is broken in either episode is pretty impressive.
It feels more like a broadcast TV move in that, like, because can you imagine watching that when you didn't have the next chapter 9 to immediately start right away? By giving us the slow walk in, they see each other. Mike smiles, which might be one of the first times I think he has smiled all season.
Yeah.
Back a number of episodes ago, towards the beginning, I gave Sadie Sink some props for her being able to ask about what was wrong with Will without it sounding accusatory or inappropriately interested, like morbidly curious, and also not being like too concerned for her level of very similarly here, the way that Mike is able to ask, why didn't you say anything? Without it sounding accusatory.
Yeah.
Oh man, to thread that needle, that's hard. And I would not be surprised if that was also like that he was directed to deliver it in that way, but still he had to actually do it.
Sure.
And the fact that he's been so angry all season, to like see this gentler side of him, I was like, that's super well done.
Yeah. I think what helps in that moment is she knows the number of days and he can see that she's been counting, and he can also see that she is just as affected by this moment as he is. There's so much nonverbal communication going on. And for us as an audience, the music is doing some of the lifting, but not that much. It's a big, 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 big moment, but you've been building to it piece by piece by piece all season, so it's earned.
I like too that we get the cutaway to Max asking if that's 11, which it not only sets up for future interactions, so we're not left wondering, well, I guess Max assumes one or the I guess she assumes one or the other of the boys clued her in.
Yeah.
And it allows us a moment to see Lucas and Dustin's shock at seeing her too. And I want to circle back to that in a minute, to their reactions once we get to their hug, because though they weren't as scarred as Mike was, they did watch her die too, or thought they did. So their shock is very, very real. And of course, this moment is interrupted when Hopper interjects and he and Elle have their reunion. And it's curt, but it's heartfelt. And I like that the where have you been exchange. It feels gruff and it feels in character for both of them.
Yeah.
But that emotion and that relief at seeing one another is there, which is made evident by their action, which is him hugging her.
Right.
And I said this at the end of the Mind Flayer, but I want to reiterate that I like that this reunion between Mike and Elle gets to be the focus. Even here. Like the reunion between Elle and Hopper, it's there, but he's known all season that she's alive. Mike doesn't.
Right.
So I'm really appreciative that they allowed space to really let us have this emotional catharsis between these two.
I love Max's reaction because she's sort of in awe. She gets a really great introduction to Elle because she sees what she can do immediately. So there's no like, can't she, that kind of thing. She sees the bond between her and Mike. So it is very natural for her to just have this conclusion of like, is that? And they're like, yeah.
But after, or I think while Elle and Hopper are hugging, that's when Mike says, kind of puts the pieces together. You've been hiding her. Hop says, let's talk alone. Elle kind of looks a little nervous or a little uncomfortable when they step aside.
As you do when your dad and your boyfriend are about to come to blows.
And Mike proceeds to freak out on Hopper.
Yeah.
Everything about this scene between them is amazing. From Hopper knowing instantly to move to another room. Like we, intuitively knowing let's take this, that Mike does deserve to talk, but it should be in private. To Mike's overwhelming anger, to Hopper taking all of Mike's rage, to Mike collapsing into crying, and Hopper's final apology. It doesn't feel like Hopper is speaking down to him at all. Hopper isn't perfect with addressing Mike either. Like he starts defensive and like logical, but he also meets Mike's anger and takes the blame immediately. I don't know. I think that Hop is upset about it all too, and judging by the break in his voice when he says, "That's okay, kid. That's okay."
Yeah. When I watched that scene, I wish Hopper had been with Elle the way he is with Mike. That is the kind of reaction and the kind of role modeling and the kind of like just emotional awareness that Mike and Elle have both needed. But at the same time, I think it would be easy, especially from a feminist lens, to be like, oh, well, he gets it when he sees what Mike needs, but he doesn't get it when he sees what Elle needs because reasons. But I also think that there's a little bit at play here of Hopper is learning from the mistakes that he made with Elle. And that's not to take away, like, I do think that there's some really interesting stuff going on with like a feminist reading of Hopper and Elle's relationship, especially earlier on in the season, because he's basically turning her into a princess in the tower. She doesn't deserve that, but I think he's learning that she doesn't deserve that. It's not actually going to keep her safe, and it's actually a disservice to her. But yeah, I absolutely love the you be mad at me, but don't be mad at her. And he's like, I'm not mad at her. I couldn't, like, because Mike intuits what happened immediately.
Well, and also Hopper apologizes in this scene. He didn't apologize before, and he knew that he needed to, and so he does. He apologizes. And I think also, like, the apology struck me different this time than it ever has before. I think it is Hopper apologizing for his role and his choices and what's happened, but I also think he's just, there's also a bit in there of like, I'm sorry that you're hurting.
Yeah. And
I absolutely agree. I think he absolutely has learned from what happened with Elle. He saw how much that really didn't work. Like, I'm not going to make that same mistake twice.
Yeah.
But the thing I really want to make sure that I say about this exchange, this scene, and what happens to Mike in this moment, that I really wish was, I guess, more evident to more people, is that this is an emotional release for Mike. Him finally just letting himself experience all of the hurt, all of the grief, everything he's been holding on to all year. It's like she's okay, she's safe, she's alive. I can finally, like, actually let myself feel this.
Yeah, and the survivor's guilt as well.
Yeah.
Because, from Mike's perspective, she died saving him. That's a lot. That is a lot for adults to cope with. That is quite a burden for a preteen to be carrying.
Yeah, it feels surprisingly, like, emotionally insightful. But we cut out of that into the Elle, Dustin, and Lucas hug. And yes, yes, it is a fun recreation of, or a nod to, the hug that follows the she's our friend and she's crazy from season 1. But what I love about it is that Lucas gets to be here for this one, because that happened in season 1 before they had yeah, exactly. And it's a nice bookend to, you know, our noting of the she doesn't call out to them as well as Mike. She does get to have a moment with just them. Mm-hmm. And then we get Max and Elle's introduction.
Oh my god. No.
I hate it.
No, I must disrespectfully decline. I get her feeling jealous in the moment when she saw Max interacting with Mike. I'm not saying that, like, that was a good or healthy or, you know, well-adjusted place to be, but I get it. I genuinely don't get it in this scene, because they've just had this incredibly emotional reunion. She can see how he feels. She has been hearing him calling out to her. Now, I do think that Elle has a little bit of stunted emotional growth because of the environment that she was raised in. And even when she left the lab, because of the environment that she was raised in under Hopper, which is just like total isolation. So I can see her being a little weird with Max. I could almost see her being like, yeah, great. Mm-hmm. You know?
My script doctor approach to it would be that she kind of looks sort of not unlike the way that she reacts to Dustin, like, you have teeth, like, just kind of awkward, like in the way that we've seen her be, like, then in other places. But then she just gets distracted by Joyce. Yeah. Like, she sees Joyce.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is definitely a scene that screams written by a dude, because I can hear somebody being like, haha, cat fight.
What it screams to me is that they didn't know what to do. Mm-hmm. They were like, we'll just have like what do we do with this interaction? And I don't think they wanted to spend a lot of time on it, so they didn't. To me, something that I kind of have been tracking is like Elle's sort of like forward towards darker. But she's had her experience with Kali. She's realized, I don't want to go down that road. Mm-hmm. She's pulled back. She's come back to Hawkins. To me, that feels regressive.
And even, like, Joyce would watch Elle intentionally be shitty to another kid and not say anything.
It's a little odd to me that Max steps forward before Joyce does. But Joyce and Elle do have their reunion, and that's, you know, that's really, really wonderful. And I like that it's Elle that asks about Will. Mm-hmm. Joyce is like, hey, I'm just happy to see you. You know,
I think she calls her sweetie, which is so nice.
Mm-hmm. After she sees Will, that's when Joyce asks, if we can get you back to the lab, you know, you opened this gate. If we get you back there, can you close it? Elle doesn't answer, but we cut full shot of the gate and the Demodog's guarding it, establishing just how horrible the odds are. And then we get the title sequence.
Jesus, all of that was before the title sequence.
Yes, it's a long cold open.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the longest, but it definitely is one of the weightiest.
Yeah.
But out of the title sequence, we land in a candlelit bathroom. Karen Wheeler is in a bubble bath, reading a romance novel, listening to Barbra Streisand's The Way We Were. The doorbell rings repeatedly, like a lot. And since Ted is passed out in the living room, Karen has to scramble out of the tub to answer the door, where Billy is waiting, looking pretty much just like the Adonis on the cover of her book. And he turns on the charm as Donna Summer's I Do Believe I Fell in Love plays. I remember the first time I watched this sequence, I was like, what are we doing? What are we doing? Is this going to get weird and gross and really, really weird? What are we doing? Yeah. What are we doing? And they didn't go there. Mm-hmm. Now I can find it amusing.
I find myself in a sort of like Karen Wheeler apologist role when it comes to this scene. Reading a romance novel, listening to some music, lighting some candles. In 2021, we call that self-care. Mm-hmm. You know, so she's just taking a moment. She's just relaxing, having a nice time, having a relaxing bubble bath. Mm-hmm. And like, you know, given how stressful we have seen her life is, I think our girl has earned it.
Absolutely. No argument.
And I do actually think that there's a kind of like relatability or common experience to like, you know, mom takes care of everything and she just wants to take a bubble bath. But of course, the second that she tries to relax, something explodes and she's got to interrupt her moment of self-care and go take care of it. And there's also humor in the like, how do you not hear the doorbell over and over and over? I feel like everybody has had an experience like that. Do you not hear the phone? Do you not hear the doorbell?
Yeah.
Or, you know,
Yeah.
the microwave is beeping or something. So I definitely did have a different reaction to the sequence between her and Billy in this episode, watching it now than watching the first time. The first time I was also very uncomfortable. Billy is very easily able to charm her into giving away information that she should not be giving away because she's actively putting all of the kids in danger by helping Billy find them. She doesn't know that.
Yes.
And I felt a little bit like the scene might be framed so as to like judge her for falling for Billy's charm. And now when I watch it, I don't feel that way. You know, she was just having her like, you know, having her relaxing moment, and she rushed down and was not expecting to see, she wasn't, I don't think she was even expecting to see someone she doesn't know. She was probably expecting to, like, that Mike had forgot his key or something, you know, because she looks really shocked when it's someone she doesn't know and when it's, you know,
the guy on the cover. I mean, literally, like, and apparently that is a real romance novel.
Oh yeah, I recognize the that style of cover is called a clinch cover, and it was all the rage from like the 70s through the 90s. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I assumed that they like took the style and then like fabricated, you know, like made one up, like just for like licensing reasons or whatever, you know, kind of like, I don't know, like a fake cereal or something, and but just to like you know, fake. But no, apparently that's an actual factual book. They really make sure that you see the cover.
Yeah.
In that slow dolly shot, like up to her in the bath.
But I definitely think that the creep factor is on Billy's end. But I think that Billy is either a narcissist or has very narcissist tendencies. Because one trait of someone who is a narcissist is to be able to read people incredibly well and to mirror them back, which is how they make people like them. You know, she comes to the door in like sexy housewife with sexy housewife energy. And he's like, oh, sexy housewife energy. You got it. And gives that right back to her. And like, because of the way that Billy is acting, I don't blame her for being like flustered and charmed.
Oh, yeah, me neither.
I think it's that much more like sinister that he is able to just like, with a snap of a finger, turn on that flirtatiousness and know exactly what she needs to hear so that he can get what he wants from her. He also says things like, oh, I'm worried sick about her. No, the fuck he's not. In last episode, when he's like, she's 13, she just went and like is hanging out with her friends or something. He's actually justified in not being super worried about her. I just think it's really, really interesting that he consistently refers to her as his sister and talks about how worried he should be about her, which he is about her, which is what his father said he should be saying and feeling in the previous episode. I think that the masking that Billy does for different audiences is both really interesting and sad, because it's definitely an indication of how much emotional abuse he has suffered, because he develops those skills in order to deal with his home environment. When
she says to him, you must be here for Nancy, and he says, Nancy, no, not my type. I read that as, no, I'm not into girls. But I think what they chose to like retcon that to mean, the, I guess technically canon explanation, is that I'm interested in women, not girls.
There's a lot to unpack in that line. There's the I don't actually like girls. There's the I don't like girls my own age. And there's also the I don't like girls that would 100% call me on my shit immediately.
This is yet another example of interactions that I would have been really interested to see, because we never see Billy and Nancy interact.
Oh my gosh, she would turn him upside down and mop the floor with his hair.
Which, I mean,
I'm here for it.
Billy also says, though, in this exchange, he said he went to the Sinclairs already. And like, yikes.
Well, yikes, and I am not suggesting that Billy is a forward-thinking individual when it comes to race. He's 100% racist. However, we have seen how good he is at masking. So it is also entirely possible that he rocked up to the Sinclair's front door, like, he's gonna know they're black. And he knocks on the door, and either Mr. or Mrs. Sinclair answers it, and he's like, oh, I'm looking for my sister. You know, and they're just like, yeah, she ain't here.
Spot on impression, by the way.
David Montgomery, I apologize.
That's what you think of his performance, apparently. Not Montgomery's, Billy's.
Dagger Montgomery is playing Billy, who is playing a decent person.
Yes. Oh, burn.
Yeah, there's no doubt in my mind that he was able to turn on the charm and internalize the racism, and and probably that is what's fueling part of his anger is, that first of all, he told her not to associate with Lucas. But he's like, I already told her not to associate with Lucas. Now I have to go to these people's houses and see if she's there, when I told her that she shouldn't even be hanging out with him. And, people who are that racist don't want to be seen going to a black person's house. So he's probably pissed off about that. And yeah, like I can very much see him being able to turn on the charm. Now, I think it would be interesting to see whether or not the Sinclairs would see through that a little bit more easily than Karen did, because he's not going to be turning on like the seductive charm with them. Again, that's not the energy that they're going to be greeting him with. But I wonder, in fact, I kind of have to think that if they had shot that scene, that they would have been like, no.
Yeah, and I wonder if that's partly why we don't see it. Mm-hmm. Because it's almost a throwaway line. Like, I kind of think it's only in the scene, A, because you're caught up in the middle of him basically quasi-seducing Karen.
Yeah.
And also because there's this moment of, like, I think there might have been a, like, how do we circle that square? Mm-hmm. Like, how do we actually, or thread the needle might be a better way to put it, because it's like, how do we actually manage to accomplish all of that? It's too much to try to do in the season finale.
Yeah.
And they were already at an episode more than last season.
Sure.
And and at the end of that scene, that's when Karen gives him directions to the buyer's house. And after some more flirting, she watches him leave, just like the high school girls did. Like, there's even the same shot where it's like a little bit angled down.
Yeah, and he not only immediately turns off like the charm and like the emotional aspect, like it's not funny, but it's like hilarious, like in a mean way, that she says like, hey, it's really dark out there. She's probably thinking about, like, I would think about deer. She's like, so drive slow. And he's like, always.
But back at the buyers, they're all, yet again, rallied around the kitchen table where they try to make a new plan. And Dustin officially introduces the term demodogs for the first time, he speaks it into the canon. And I love how is this relevant right now? It's not, I'm sorry. But yet later he's gonna insist, demodogs! Mm-hmm. Like, Elle asserts that she can close the gate, but Mike and Lucas together deduce that Will is a part of the hive mind. And so, closing the gate will kill him. Joyce, mostly, along with Jonathan, Mike, and Dustin, figure out that they have to burn it out of him. Burn the mind flayer out of him.
Like a fever. Kind of fight your instincts in the way that Will has been like, no, he likes it cold. And Joyce is like, not today, motherfucker.
Also, if I may... Max and Steve stand in the back in the doorway because they're both separate from these relationships and this conversation and this knowledge and this part of the story, quite frankly. Mm-hmm. Joyce, Jonathan, and Will load up, preparing to depart for Hopper's cabin. Meanwhile, Steve and Nancy scope through the junk in the backyard, I guess, for space heaters.
Everything that they tossed out of the shed and prepping to make it an interrogation room.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
I finally understand where that pile of stuff comes. And that explains why then we get the nod to season 1 where Steve holds up the Christmas lights. Mm-hmm. Which I liked, even not knowing what that, like, where it all came from. I was like, I don't care. It's a reference to season 1. It's cool.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, if you kind of aren't thinking of that, it's like, how is all that equipment even still functional? Like, hasn't it been rained on and whatnot? Like, no, it's only been outside for like an hour.
Yeah. Steve says that Nancy should go with Jonathan, And Nancy tries to go, no, I don't want to leave Mike, to which he says that he's sticking around. You know, no one's leaving anyone. And we get the now famous line, I may be a pretty shitty boyfriend, but it turns out I'm actually a pretty damn good babysitter. Which I got even one more level deep insight with this line than I ever have before, because you pointed out the thing last episode when we were watching it about how Billy saying Max doesn't need a full-time babysitter. Billy is rejecting this role, and Steve is like actually kind of embracing it. I just think that's an interesting parallel, and I've kind of gone kind of 6 rounds with that exchange, because I used to hate that line. I used to really hate that he says, not the damn good babysitter part, the shitty boyfriend part. Based on our conversations over the course of season 1, over the course of this season, I have to admit that, like, maybe that's referring to, like, his decision at the party, which...
Ditching? Yeah. I mean, I think the shitty boyfriend is referring to pressuring her into going to the party when she was clearly not up for going out and socializing, and for not understanding her need to go to Barb's parents. And
yes, and I hear that, but I also think that, like, you know, you said it best last season, she and Jonathan get each other on a level that she and Steve just were never going to.
Yeah.
It was just a case of, like, we like Steve, we just don't love Steve. Like, Murray's analysis is pretty spot on.
Yeah.
So I think it's like, yeah, he's made some mistakes, but I also think it just wasn't, it's just
not a good match.
And I think that's ultimately where he's coming from in this scene. And I also kind of like that they linger on her being alone in the frame. I don't know, it's not a lot, but I like it because I think it actually kind of shows, yeah, I have no doubt she's meant to be with Jonathan at this point. And she wants to be with Jonathan. But I do think it's kind of just a nice little touch, because it's like, yeah, but by being with Jonathan, you do you lose something with Steve.
Right.
And I think that may have been an editing choice. Then we get a much more emotional farewell between Mike and Eleven. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels kind of like an inverse of the typical setup. Like, she's the hero having to go off into battle, and he's the one who has to sit by and say, be careful, I love you. And with that, both parties are off. Then we get the really emotional scene between Hop and Eleven in the car. She fills Hopper in on where she went, and he proceeds to apologize and open up about why he's done the things that he's done, that he feels like a black hole. And then he tells her about Sarah. I theorized that Kali being so open and so candid, to a degree, about what she'd been through, like offering like open, emotional, like sisterly, like familial connection, and being more vulnerable with Elle. Hopper really hasn't done that with her. Yeah. It's been very gruff, it's been very curt, he's been very closed off until he made that call on the radio. Then to have her come back, she's made the choice that, like, well, even if he's not gonna be that, I'm still gonna go back. But then she gets it here. And she gets to see, like, yeah, you're in a lot of pain, too.
It's a really good moment of reconciliation.
But back at the Byers, Dustin clears out the fridge to make way for the dead Demodog.
God. This child.
But I mean, I've talked about it before, like, the sort of repartee between characters. Like, this is no exception. Like, the fact that you get the, like, okay, go ahead. And then the, like, pan over to Steve going, is this really necessary? And the fact that Dustin responds immediately, yes, it is. This is an important discovery, and we cannot let it go. And then, all right, but you're explaining this to Mrs. Byers. And then the struggle and, like, the door, like...
Oh, yeah, everything.
I mean, I don't know how much of this was improv, but it feels so natural. It does not feel scripted. It does not feel directed. It does not feel staged.
It's also disgusting.
Oh, yeah.
I think also part of what sells it as a moment is because you, as an audience member, 100% believe and understand and even support both reactions, even though they're diametrically opposed, you know, because Dustin is 100% right. Like, if he studies one of these demodogs and figures out what it is, he could be winning, like, a Nobel Peace Prize and everything else. Meanwhile, you know.
Yeah, like, they don't understand the upside down. And this, into Dustin's point from last episode, this is a big problem. Yeah. And the lab's clearly not doing
they're insufficient.
It's like we have a chance, we have a corpse, we need to do an autopsy. That's like, so he's definitely not wrong, but it's also like, sorry, Joyce.
I bet that's not the weirdest thing that Joyce has found in her fridge.
Certainly not after the events of last season.
Yeah. The most disruptive, maybe, but not the most surprising.
The rest of the group, though, are cleaning up. At least Max and Lucas are cleaning up the mess in the living room while Mike paces. And they wind up concocting a plan to help Eleven and Hopper by creating a diversion peppered by Steve's objections.
So, okay, here's my question about a plot hole that may not be a plot hole.
Okay.
We have figured out that Will is connected to the Mind Flayer and to the Demodogs, and that to hurt them hurts Will.
Yes.
And we've said, okay, so before we close the gate, we have to disinfect Will, for want of a better term. So how does it not also register that hurting the tunnels in order to draw the Demodogs away will also hurt Will?
That is a really good point. I think they're aware that it's going to hurt Will, but I think that I mean, they don't say that. They don't say that in so many words in the scene, but I think that's sort of, honestly, it's really no different than what Joyce, Jonathan, and Nancy are going to do. They're burning it out of him. Yeah. So if the host is no longer hospitable, it will still leave. But at the same time, I think you've made a pretty astute observation of the fact that, like, but those two things at the same time.
Well, and we saw his reaction to when the vines were burned.
Yes. So I think that actually you're right. I think that may be a plot hole.
I mean, I can kind of hand wave it by saying they assume that Will already be, again, like, disinfected by the time they get to the hub. But there's no textual support for that. So that's just a, like, I don't want to think about that. So this is what I'm deciding.
Like, Will's physical person was actually fine. It was all in his head. But I think then you're getting into the, like, but if you die in the Matrix, you die here kind of thing. So I don't know. That would be a question for the Duffers. Steve, though, himself interrupts the plan making fully and puts his foot down. I promised I'd keep you shithead safe, and that's exactly what I plan to do. The kids seem to, however annoyed, lose their enthusiasm at that point, because they're, like, on a roll, and then he does the hey.
I need a yes.
But they don't actually agree to not do it.
No. Yeah.
Because that's when Billy arrives. And Max says, he can't know I'm here. He'll kill me. He'll kill us. And we cut to Steve right after that. And I wonder if this is actually the first time that Steve puts it together that Max is Billy's sister.
I kind of, like, maybe, but I also kind of read it as this is one of the first times that Steve is realizing that, like, Billy is dangerous. Like, he's not just a pain in the ass. He's a threat.
And I think that realization continues to set in over the course of what follows. So yeah, he goes out there to turn Billy away. And I actually think that Steve sells this really well. It's the kids, leering in the window that gives it away. I'm like, if they hadn't done that, Billy would have no ground. I mean, he might have gone in anyway. It's probably pointless to say that. But I think it's also key to note that Billy doesn't really assure Steve is down for the count before he goes into the house.
That exchange, that part of the fight, if we take, like, the whole thing as a singular fight, I think that was just about, like, get out of my way. Like, he was not coming from a place of wanting to really inflict a lot of damage on Steve. That was about humiliating him. Now, granted, he wanted to hurt Steve, because if he didn't want to hurt him, he would just shove him and walk by. But that was about, like, overpowering him, especially with the comment, like, I told you to plant your feet. That was about dominance.
I think there's also room for reading it that I don't think he expected Steve to get back up.
No.
And why? Are the kids just hanging out in the house when he comes in? Why are they not hiding?
I know.
Why didn't they sneak out the back door?
I don't know, dude.
Like, I know kids can be stupid sometimes, but these are not stupid children. These are strategic kids.
I find it really hard to believe that both Max and Lucas would be looking out the window when Max knows how much of a threat Billy is, especially how much of a threat he is to Lucas. I feel like at the very least, now granted, like, they have to be there so that Billy can see them, so that the scene can proceed, but I really feel like Max would say, like, Lucas, you gotta go. Buddy, you gotta go. Go hide in the shed. You cannot be here.
And that's something that, like, they could have easily done, like, where they're just getting out through the kitchen and Billy just catches up to them. Like, yeah. I feel like that's easy enough to do. Or, like, yeah, Lucas isn't there. Or, I don't know. Like, it just seems like they could have blocked it differently and it would have worked better. Yeah, Billy does come in and pins Lucas to the wall. Lucas gets a kick in, though.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's really, really interesting that Billy definitely expects that interaction to go differently. Mm-hmm. And I think it's very interesting and worth noting that Billy says to Max, what happens when you just, I break things, and then goes to Lucas. Because, again, he's not a nice guy, but he's not stupid. He intuits, he knows that her relationship with Lucas is very meaningful to her. He knows that she wants to protect him, so he deliberately targets Lucas. I mean, I also think that he probably feels less guilt attacking Lucas because Lucas is black. But the real crux of it is because Max cares about him. And I think it would be reasonable to expect a kid Lucas's age to just be like, blah, and to like break down and be really, really scared. But Lucas is just not today, which is very much in keeping with how Lucas has been the entire time we've known him. I mean, he faced down a Demogorgon with a wrist rocket and like did not think twice about it. He is not a guy who's going to cave and be intimidated by Billy.
Him getting that one kick in, it does make Billy back up, but it only seems to kind of piss him off.
Yeah, he poked the bear a bit.
Yeah, and so Billy says, you're dead, Sinclair.
As the fight progresses with Steve, which Steve is okay after everything that Billy does to him. I would say that he is expecting or planning to do to Lucas at least what he was expecting to do to Steve, but within the kind of universe logic, he's not gonna die. He's just gonna have the shit kicked out of him.
Well, except that the only reason, I mean, again, using the in-universe logic, because I kept a tally of like the injuries that Billy does to Steve. The only reason that Steve is not dead is because Max interferes. Mm-hmm. So if Steve hadn't come in at this moment and turned the fight towards him,
I think the fight really, really, really escalates. And I think Billy's mental state deteriorates very severely throughout the course of his fight with Steve. I'm not defending Billy.
No.
But there is so much trauma and rage and unworked through stuff that Steve is just triggering over and over and over by undercutting Billy's power, because he does that repeatedly throughout. Again, if we take this as a big one long fight, Billy continually tries to intimidate, he's doing the things that he has done with everyone else. He's wearing the mask, and Steve is just not being a cooperative audience member, if you will, and that just like really, really rattles Billy very, very deeply. And then he gets his attention redirected toward seeing the kids and, directs his attention towards Lucas. But then he's in the middle of doing his like, I'm the big bad wolf. And Steve comes along and undercuts him and, breaks his moment of power again. I think a lot of the hatred towards Steve is he's supplanting his father onto Steve. I respect the statements. I think there's a lot of homoeroticism happening here that you just can't reasonably turn a blind eye to. And I think that, the reason that he's attacking Steve the way that he is because Billy hates himself and because Billy hates Steve for the way that he feels about Steve. And he also can tell that his feelings are completely unreciprocated, which only further enrages him.
Because then when Steve reappears, he gets a hit in, mm-hmm. and at first Billy's like, finally, King Steve, like, all right, let's do this. And Steve is just like, no, leave. Yeah. He doesn't want to even engage.
Yeah.
The one thing that's like even like acceptable
Right.
interaction. Steve's like, I don't want it.
Yeah.
Just go. And he's choosing the kids. He's defending the kids.
Yeah.
Billy sort of was what Steve was going to be originally. I think it's fascinating, like how these two characters then end up fighting each other, and how you kind of get to see sort of, you know, weirdly, like, I don't know if this is the best comparison, but kind of Valjean and Javert almost. Like, you have two people who are kind of faced with a lot of the same stuff. I mean, I don't mean like their family background and whatnot, but like you have these two that were sort of meant to be kind of, they started in the same place, and then their paths went in very different directions, but they end up facing off. Like, it ends up in this confrontation between these two, but it's surrounding the kids.
Right.
Like, they didn't plan on the Steve Dustin bond. Them seeing that and implementing that, I think, ends up being like this really fascinating blend of predetermined intention and then also using what naturally evolved on its own, and then them putting that into this finale, especially considering that again none of this has anything to do with the lab or the mind flayer or the Demogorgon. This is all real world conflict,
Right.
and I like that. Yeah, get out, he says, and like just kind of nudges Billy, like, and then Billy like waits a second and then takes a swing. Steve ducks and gets a second hit in. Comparatively, Billy shoves Steve down and kicks him in the stomach before he goes into the house. Billy breaks the plate over Steve's head. Billy headbutts Steve, and then Billy just wails on Steve once he's down. He hits him in the face at least 10 times. Yeah, Steve's dead. Concussion, internal bleeding, like, but anyway, instead of continuing to yell along with the others, Max takes up the syringe and pulls a rogue-style sneak attack. She's the rogue.
Zoomer is her subclass.
Yes, I like that. And then she takes up Steve's bat and demands that Billy leave her and her friends alone from now on. And when he says, "Screw you," she slams the bat into the floor between his legs as a threat. And I like the symmetry of this too, because Steve jumped in front of her with the bat in the school bus to fight the Demodog, and he took on Billy for, here. But here she gets to save him, even using his weapon.
Yeah. I like that it's Max who ends the fight. That puts energy into her agency. It gives her like a kind of light at the end of the tunnel for everything that she's going through with Billy. And I think it's kind of interesting in sort of like detective fiction and pop culture. There's this very dark joke that like poison is a woman's weapon because it can be administered without a whole lot of physical strength. And also because women typically are the ones who are preparing the food and so on. So this isn't poison, it's a sedative, but it doesn't require any physical strength. It doesn't require that she like knock him down or whatever. She is able to just like sneak up right behind him and just administer this knockout drug. So I like that she has this sort of more feminine approach to fighting. And then she takes up a fucking spiked bat and like whams it down like right next to his dick and was like, I need you to tell me that you understand, which is a very, very aggressive, much more quote unquote, because like, gender is bullshit, but a more masculine approach to fighting. It's very physical. It's very physically intimidating, and it's threatening him on a very like masculine level.
Threatening your manhood.
Right.
On a number of levels.
Yeah, and emotionally and physically, which I think is really, really interesting. So, I think that is what makes him able or forced to concede.
It really is so rewarding to have it be like her go, I've had about enough of you. Mm-hmm. All of the guys, it's been all this like aggression and physical altercations. There's all this punching, there's all this hitting, there's kicking,
posturing, and
well, and just even the yelling. It's like all of them, like I just said it, like they're all yelling and screaming, and the sound drowns out and the sound design and the mixing, and she's not saying anything, and very silently she just she thinks of the sedative and she's like, we're done here. Mm-hmm. He passes out, she takes his keys, and let's get out of here. So I do have a question for you, though. No psychologist or psychiatrist here, but I think you understand the psychological like stuff that's happening here a little better than I do. So, because I find that even though she gets him to agree he says, I understand. I guess in my mind, I'm questioning, like, and I'm going to guess this is because she's done this once. She could effectively do it again, but she's humiliated him in a way, I'm guessing, is why this is binding. Because I find that I'm like, why, to a degree, it's kind of like, what's holding him to this agreement?
Nothing. And I think if Max were the main character, we would see him like pushing against that boundary, and, it would be kind of like a cycle kind of thing. But I think that she has demonstrated that she's punched the bully, basically. Mm-hmm. And so she has demonstrated that she is not going to just accept his treatment of her, which she has up to this point, not because she approves of it or thinks she deserves it, but she just didn't feel that she had any recourse to fight back. Now she has demonstrated not only that she can fight back, but that she will. And that is going to give him a lot of pause before he starts picking at her and taking his anger out on her and so on and so forth. So it's entirely possible that like it wouldn't be binding forever, but I definitely think that it would grant her at least a temporary reprieve.
Yeah, because I think my fear every time I watch it is like, I mean, we have season 3, so I know that this doesn't happen, but like that there might have been like a more intense version of what happens with Lucas earlier, like that he hit back and it just pissed him off. Mm-hmm. Is he going to be
that much more aggressive?
Or like kind of a little bit vengeful?
Probably.
But we cut away from that moment back to the Byers and Nancy as they arrive at the cabin and surround Will with the space heaters, and they light the fire. Meanwhile, Hopper and Elle arrive at Hawkins' lab. And I really like that the show takes the time to pause here and give Eleven the moment to sort of gulp, take the deep breath, allowing us to realize and remember, if we haven't already, because I'll admit, I didn't think of this, that this is where she fought so hard to get away from.
Mm-hmm. This is the first time she's been back.
Mm-hmm. How much horror she endured there, and what going back to close the gate means for her personally. And no one else. Especially since it never comes up with any of the other characters. Mm-hmm. Not even here, not even with Hopper. Like, he doesn't even seem to register that. And, he breaks down the plan and, that she save her strength. And when she doesn't respond and just sort of charges forward, he kind of rolls his eyes like, teenagers. Which is cute. I'm not mad about it, but it does mean that not one of the people there realizes what she's having to do. She looks up at the lab and you can hear the demodogs like making noise. It's like there's a lot of double meaning right there. Mm-hmm. So I like that even though the characters don't think of it, the show does.
Yeah.
And it allows us to as well.
I mean, she hasn't talked a great deal about what went on with her at the lab. She literally doesn't have the words for it.
And I don't think for a second, knowing what we know about 11, like, there's no way she'd object.
Yeah.
Like, well, I don't know. I mean, I can do it. I can close the gate. But I mean, maybe she hasn't even considered what it means until they pull up to the lab.
Yeah.
Steve, meanwhile, comes to in the back of Billy's car.
Oh, this poor baby.
And he is a mess, dude. Like, Dustin has a great bedside manner, acting like the bard that he is, giving encouragement. Dare I say inspiration? While Lucas navigates, Ranger, and Max drives. But Steve freaks out, and then everyone else proceeds to freak out. There's lots of yelling, smashing of a mailbox, careening off the road, all that fun stuff. At the cabin, everyone is sweating profusely while Will stirs and starts screaming. Joyce, enraged, thinking about Bob, cranks up the heaters to full blast despite Jonathan's objections.
It's the tiny moment, but I absolutely love the just kind of acting moment when Jonathan begs Joyce to stop because, he thinks that Will is dying, and then he can't look anymore and he turns around and just like collapses into Nancy's arms. That's really a beautiful thing, a really good moment of vulnerability. And, Jonathan as a character he faces things, I mean, when he thought that Will was dead, he proceeded with plans for a funeral, even though he didn't want to face, in his mind that Will was dead, but he went ahead anyway. And I don't see this in any way as him turning his back on Will or even on the situation, but just having this moment of like emotional vulnerability and knowing that he can go to Nancy and that she will hold him. And then she does. She doesn't even hesitate. She just gathers him right up and is a kind of a safe place for him to land, is really, really beautiful. And then even like a few minutes later, they're holding hands. That emotional intimacy is a really great touch.
Max skids Billy's car to a halt at Merrill's farm. I missed this before. Mike compliments her from the back seat, which I think gets overlooked a bit. They all get out of the car, they unload the gear from the trunk while Steve tries to rally despite his injuries and finally relents when Dustin presents him with a pack of gear for him too, complete with the spiky bat. Dustin kinda says the magic words. A party member requires assistance, and it is our duty to provide that assistance. He goes on to sort of repeat Steve's own words back to him. You promised Nance that you'd keep us safe, so keep us safe.
Right.
And knowing what we know about Steve at this point, how could he not go along with it? Like, I mean, injuries notwithstanding.
I mean, his injuries are gone by the time he gets out of the car, pretty much.
They leave some of the makeup there,
Yeah.
but he's not acting the way that he was before.
Yeah.
In the lab, Hopper and Elle run into a wounded Dr. Owens, and Hop patches him up as best he can, while also proposing that since Elle is about to save them all, Owens helps her out once all this is over. Joyce and Jonathan argue over turning off the heaters, and Will's voice changes. One hand gets loose, and Joyce goes to strap it back down, but Will starts choking her. At the lab, Hopper goes ahead of Elle, approaching the control room, just as Steve and the kids set the hub on fire, drawing them away. Just like Mike said they would. Hopper and Elle would have had a much harder time here if not for the distraction.
Yeah.
Just like Hop and Joyce would have had a hard time if, Elle hadn't killed all the people in season 1 and drawn the Demogorgon. But context, it's different.
Yeah.
I think that this show across all seasons places a pretty high value on teamwork. And I think the Duffers like to explore that in each season finale.
Yeah, I also think that there's a parallel to be made to Lord of the Rings. The only reason that Frodo and Sam were able to make it to Mount Doom is because the Eye of Sauron was fixed on the gate because of Aragorn. And they knew that. They knew, A, that it was hopeless, and B, that was the only way, to keep his attention away from Frodo and Sam, because he would have sensed the ring in Mordor if they hadn't made that distraction. And I think that in sci-fi fantasy literature at large, teamwork, friendship, all types of love being what saves the world is kind of a core tenet, and I mean that in a great way. So I just think that this is a way of manifesting that.
The full range of scale. Like, you have the big broad scale of like, to kill the big bad, you need this to happen, so blah, blah, blah. But then you've got all the little dynamics happening within each group too, like, that we've been analyzing. So back in the cabin, Will continues to choke Joyce, even with Jonathan trying to pry him off of her. Nancy grabs a searing hot poker from the fireplace and jabs Will with it, which shocks him into letting go. And Joyce screams, "Get out of my son."
Valid.
The black smoky stuff essence of the mind flayer escapes from Will, out of the cabin altogether. And Nancy chases after it, watching it disappear, while Joyce and Jonathan revive Will. And Hopper and Elle get a good look at the gate, just as Jonathan radios Hop with confirmation. Close it. Elle starts to do just that, and we see the mind flayer inside it. It kind of raises its head like it's seeing her for the first time. Because Elle is his focal point next season.
Yeah.
So I do think that this is actually set up that has some pretty nice payoff. In the tunnels, Mike gets caught and Steve hustles back to cut him loose, but just then Dart appears. Dustin winds up pulling an 11 here. He throws his hands out protectively in front of the rest of the group. And this is the payoff I've been rattling on about all season with these two. He apologizes for the storm cellar. It's silly, but really it's not that different from Hopper's apology.
Dustin having the same kind of arrogance as someone who thinks that they can bring home a bear cub or a lion cub or any other extremely wild, not domesticated animal and just coexist peacefully with it as if it were a cat or a dog. As a person who loves animals, I understand that urge, oh, cool animal, I like animals, let's be friends. You as a human, with proper training, etc., if you're a zookeeper, whatever, you can establish relationships with lions and tigers and bears am I within certain boundaries. You know, they will understand you as the person who brings the food, so they don't attack you on sight. But that's quite different from the bond that I have with Renji the cat. And even the bond that I have with Renji the cat has its limits. He's an animal. He's not a person. So I actually think it's really interesting and really cool. I struggle with the dart thing a lot because he eats a cat, and I'm a cat and dog and horse and hamster person. But currently in my life, I have cats. So it's actually really upsetting to me. But I don't blame Dart. Dustin was being very foolish, but I don't blame him. And I think it's cool that they get to have this moment of like détente. But Dustin has learned his lesson, and he has learned that, like, no, I can't be friends with this animal.
But his instincts to not be just like, it's a monster, kill it with fire, actually does have some
merit, because
it helps. Dart would have totally attacked them if not for Dustin's relationship with him. So, yeah. Elle, meanwhile, recalls Kali's training. We even get some cutaways to the Lost Sister and watch Elle channel her dark memories. I was surprised watching it. I even started, while I was taking my notes, I was like, well, she recalls her dark memories first. Mm-hmm. And I was so sure that we were going to see her pivot to thinking about positive stuff, like times that she had used her powers for good. Mm-hmm. And I think what I was doing was I was sort of repeating. My expectation was that it was going to be a repeat of what happened at the end of The Lost Sister, where she was thinking over her memories from season 1 with the boys and with Hop and everything. And I think it's not here. It's just channel your anger. Yeah. And like, I get it. I'm not mad about it, but it would have been, especially since then they do the whole, like, all the lights flare. That made me think of Monsters, Inc., which then made me think of the laughs are more powerful than screams, that joy is more powerful than fear. Mm-hmm. And I would have liked to have seen that here. I don't know that it would have been feasible, so I'm not like, oh, well, they should have. I just was surprised that they didn't, I guess.
I'm a little conflicted in my reading of her, like, internal process in that scene, because I think her remembering the speech from Brenner, like, you have a wound, and if you don't heal it, it will kill you. I think she is reaching for a kind of healing, even though that speech didn't come from Brenner, it came from Kali. There's a line from The Last Unicorn. It's a rare man who's mistaken for what he truly is. And I think that Kali was right, but in a way that she didn't realize. From Kali's perspective, healing comes from killing those who have wronged you. But from Elle's perspective, healing comes from protecting those that you love. When she goes back to Hawkins, she is doing more to heal her wound than she had been when she was with Kali. So I think that, like, in closing the gate, she's also healing her wound. I don't think fully, but I think partly. But I also think that I'm bringing a lot of, like, Joseph Campbell, heroine's journey, and, you know, a whole lot of other type analysis to it that A, I don't know, and B, if I really, like, step back and think about it, it doesn't seem likely.
I don't know. I think you're onto something, because they have those cutaways in there. I think that is what they're trying to say.
But I don't know. I don't know that I fully buy it. I don't know that they went far enough to establish that this is what the intention is, or this is what this is the vibe. Like,
some cutaways, like, to when she found Will in the astral plane last season might have been nice. Like, not just seeing how it affected her, but how it's affected other people.
Yeah.
Back in the tunnels, Steve hoists them all out of out back the way they came until it's just he and Dustin left. But when all the demodogs come running, they don't attack. They just run right past, headed back to the lab, and then that's when Mike knows. Hopper looks away from the gate closing, opening fire on the demodogs as they swarm in. And Elle just keeps working. The circles under her eyes get darker, her nosebleed gets worse and worse, and she keeps remembering all the darkest stuff, and her irises are bloody again. Mm-hmm. And I love the moment where her other hand shoots out.
Yeah.
And she rises off the ground, screaming as the Mind Flayer's tendrils spill out of the gate. And that's when the lights flare all across Hawkins. Like, light triumphing over dark, I think, is what they were probably going for.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there's light coming from her hands when the shadow monster's tendrils reach her. Mm-hmm. They're like dispersed by this wall of light.
And the gate closes. demodogs fall. There were a lot of dead demodogs that fell. Mm-hmm. And Hopper holds 11 and tells her, "You did so good, kid. You did so good." And he just holds her, just like Joyce did. Mm-hmm. 1 month later, Hawkins' lab is shut down and Murray watches the place empty out. Very cheerful. We get Barb's funeral. Hopper goes to meet Owens at the bar, where Owens gives him a birth certificate for 11. I was so relieved. I was so surprised to see how relieved I was when Owens was there. I was like, "Yay, you're not dead!" He says that 11's got about a year to stay hidden, but maybe one night can be an exception. We get the Bob Newby superhero drawing,
which I love.
I was like, "Thank you, Will."
When Will and Joyce are dancing, they're like rocking back and forth on their feet, but they're also rocking their arms a lot. When I started learning ballroom dance, I learned as a follower. So like somebody was leading me. Grammy asked me to dance with her, but she wanted me to lead, which I had never done before. So when I was like, as I was figuring out the steps, I started doing the like seesaw arms, and very, in very good humor, she was like, "Hey, cut that out."
Just like with the Halloween costumes, Karen takes photos of Mike while Lucas practices asking Max to dance. I mean, he doesn't say... does he say Max by
I don't think so.
Okay. But we know that's who it's for.
Oh, yeah.
Max and Billy share a look as Susan does Max's hair. And I'm not sure how to read that exchange.
It's possibly going to sound like I'm giving Billy a lot of credit here. I'm not. I think that Billy is sad because he sees that Max and her mom have this connection. That obviously he and his dad don't have, and that he probably hasn't felt in his life since his mom died. Mm-hmm. The look is like, "You're still under contract." And he's like, yeah, I know. At the same time, like, I still don't feel bad for Billy, because Billy has chosen how to be with Max. He doesn't have any control over the dynamic between himself and his father, but he does have at least some control over, repeating patterns, blah, 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 but no, he does not have to treat Max like that.
No.
He chose to. And so, like, yes, he's sad. I just don't feel bad for him.
At Dustin's, Muse gets a stocking, and Dustin's mom has a new kitten. No. The doorbell rings and she says, "That's your ride?" And he does. Steve gives him the ride to the snowball and continues to, with the whole, "You don't care."
Which is the worst advice.
Is the worst advice. But he does follow by telling Dustin that he looks great.
Yes.
Which I think he does. I think he looks adorable.
Yeah. This is another definitely written by a dude. There was no lady script doctor that was either present or paid attention to, because this is very much like Teenage Girls Be Bitches.
Oh, everything that follows?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, but even the rest of his friends give him shit about his hair.
Which, again, is silly. Like, it's...
Mr. Clark is, like, looking very snazzy tonight.
Yeah.
Thank you, my lord. I love that. I love that he calls Mr. Clark my lord. I love it. But before we get to them, though, in the car, Steve sees Nancy through the doors, and she's serving punch, and the, you don't care advice is clearly BS for him, too. Because he still obviously does care. And then that's when Dustin goes into the gym and he says a coolish hello to Nancy as he walks by. "Hey, Nance." And she meanwhile shares a warm look with Jonathan, who's taking pictures, which is very cute. And then that's when the Mike, Lucas, Max, and Will, I don't know if Will actually contributes to the like, "You look ridiculous," but they're like, "What'd you do to your hair?" I don't know. I mean, it's out there, but I like it.
It's very 80s.
Yeah. But that's when a slow dance starts, and Lucas tries to ask Max to dance, but she has to help him out. Girl walks up to Will, she calls him Zombie Boy, but asks him to dance, which makes him stammer. With encouragement from Mike, takes a while to accept. That's when Dustin approaches Stacy. So I don't have a lot of like first-hand experience to use as comparison or contrast for what happens here, but it does seem like what I've seen a lot in different television shows.
Yeah, I mean, I have been to a number of dances in my time, school dances. And unlike with social dancing, when you're a grown-up, asking someone to dance at a school dance is like a formal overture. And like it means something. So if Dustin is trying to go into this dance, like, and approach girls as if they don't already know him and be like, "Big purr."
Shall we?
it's not going to work because they already know him. And he's not like, whether he realizes it or not, he's not necessarily coming from a very authentic place. He's trying to knock him dead kind of thing. And like, I don't judge Dustin for wanting to like look sharp and be impressive, but acting like these girls are stupid or bitchy, you know, how I think that scene probably would have played out like IRL is he would have walked up and been like, shall we? And she would have been like, oh, I'm getting some punch. Yes, my punch. Yes. And then like scurried away.
I think it's a bit of a yes and, because I think that those kinds of girls do exist. But I think my issue with this whole sequence is that it seems to almost like make the statement that that's like all that girls are at this age. Like Nancy even says that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's not really fair.
Are Elle and Max like that? No.
There are girls like Susie at Hawkins Middle School. Like those girls are there, but Dustin's not approaching them.
Right.
But yeah, that it's still hard to watch just because Dustin is upset by it. And Nancy finds him crying.
Over by himself.
And I think partly too that, you know, this is stuff that like I've talked about it a little bit in terms of like Lucas and Max and Mike over the course of the season. You talked about it last season with Lucas and Mike and Elle, how this, because being a kid is hard. Like you're going through so much so frequently all of the time. And I think Dustin is feeling like just the seismic shifts happening in their group, and like they're not bad, but I think it's making him a little sad. And so, you know, it's cute to me that Nancy does come and dance with him. I do like that. I don't like what she says. I would have rather have had Nancy say something like, don't waste your time on someone who doesn't see how cool you are. Like even something like that would have been better. Like, why do we have to make it, well, girls, just all girls this age are dumb. Yeah. Like, why? What was the point of that?
There isn't one.
Them dancing together, like, it's kind of been teased at through the whole second season that, like, Dustin has a little bit of an innocent crush on Nancy. And that was one of the things, like, that he and Steve seemed to have in common. But also that, like, you know, their first scene together in the first season, you know, was her shutting the door on him. And then to have her here say, of all my brother's friends, you're my favorite. And have them have this cute little moment. It's just really cute.
Yeah, I like that.
Outside the school, Hopper joins Joyce, where she's parked, giving Will a few feet. And they share another cigarette. And they talk about Bob and Sarah without saying either name out loud. Without going into too much, I will just say that I really like how understanding and how supportive Hopper feels in this moment. It doesn't feel strictly romantic to me. It really just feels like he's there.
He's just there for her.
Yeah. A new song starts inside. Elle appears.
She is so cute. That dress is very quote unquote 80s does 40s because it's very influenced by like 40s era fashion, but it's incredibly 80s. I just like that as like a fashion history note.
It's not color coordinated with what Mike's wearing.
Yes.
And they get to dance. Nancy and Dustin keep dancing. Will keeps dancing with the same girl he's with. Max kisses Lucas. Mike and Eleven get their long overdue kiss. And pretty much that's where we end. It does the slow, you know, pull back. The whole building tilts upside down. And of course, this is all the new song is, of course, I'll Be Watching You. Ultimately, I like the ending overall, but you know, I like that they were trying to set up some sort of an everyone lives happily ever after kind of vibe.
I do actually find that I'm a little bit bothered by the kissing. I'm a person who, like, I love romance. I often joke that, like, every movie should have more kissing. But teenage actors, and I don't want to say that they have, like, no agency or anything like that, but it is uncomfortable for me to watch those actors kiss, because I think that despite them giving it their best effort, I can see that the actors are uncomfortable, and I'm not okay with that.
It doesn't feel organic. When they're hugging each other and they're just like, you know, their foreheads are together, like that all feels very, very natural. Apparently Sadie Sink was very, very nervous. Caleb McLaughlin says that that was his first kiss. I get the impression, I don't think they ever say as much that it was Sink's as well, but that's my impression. Apparently her nerves were very obvious. I think she was just very because she knew that, and apparently Brown was sort of teasing her about it before, because Mike and Eleven's kiss was in the script. Lucas and Max's was not. And so they showed up on, like, I think Sadie Sink said that she and Noah Schnapp showed up to, like, look at the set and just come check it out. And again, this is all in the Beyond, I'm not, like, I'm paraphrasing, but it's all in Beyond Stranger Things. They showed up and the Duffers were there, and one of them said, are you ready, for yours? And she freaked out. She was like, what are you talking about? I don't have a kiss in this scene. Like, I've been very thorough. Like, and apparently her overreaction, he says in the episode of Beyond Stranger Things, he's like, well, then I had to make you do it then.
Oh, no, that's really upsetting.
When Finn Wolfhard and Millie Bobby Brown did their kiss, apparently, like, everyone clapped, like, all the extras clapped, and they were like, why are you like, it's calling attention to how much attention they're all paying to them. Apparently Wolfhard and Brown, like, got theirs done in like a couple of takes, but then McLaughlin and Sink, they had to do it over and over and over again because of the camera operator. It was like they kept, like, the timing kept being weird, and like the Steadicam operator was like, now, like, he was cueing them because he could tell they were struggling, and they kept missing McLaughlin's reaction, so they had to do it like 8 times. So it was, and even knowing that, like, I could tell from the way it's cut that they had to splice together multiple takes.
This is just worse and worse.
Mm-hmm. So I really have a lot of issues with not so much the what happens, but how it was brought about. And I don't think you needed it.
She could have given him a kiss on the cheek. It would have been just as sweet. It probably would have calmed both his nerves and her nerves. It would have been quite possibly easier to film, or they could just hug. I really, really, really have a problem with forcing your actors to do things that they are uncomfortable with, no matter what their ages are. If it was me, a 37-year-old woman, and I suddenly decided I wanted to be an actor, and there was even a kissing scene, even if it was just like a little, peck, and I was genuinely, sincerely uncomfortable with it, and it wasn't in the scene, wasn't in the script, I don't understand why it's necessary to force me to do it. And if it's not necessary to force me to do it when I'm 37, it really should not be necessary or even acceptable to force a teenager to do it. And that's a lot to unpack, but I would really just rather throw the whole suitcase away.
Like, even if you want to be generous and say it's not the actual act of having to do a kiss actually bothers her, even if it was the fact of, like, I'm not prepared for it, that's a huge part of an actor's process. So it may have been that she was like, I'm not prepared, I don't know what's happening, there's a lot of, because Brown had been giving her a hard time, like, had been teasing her about it. That's not as bad as what ended up happening, but it's like, because she was already feeling nervous, not being an actor, I like to know ahead of time what I'm going to be asked to do. I know that there are a lot of actors who thrive on improv, and there are actors who, like, no, I need to know what the script says. And I have worked with both. There's so much vulnerability that's included in that. Every actor is different, and there are different schools of thought, even within schools of thought. So even if she alone had been given time to prepare, it may have affected her comfort level with it.
Yeah.
And we'll never know because she was robbed of that experience.
Yeah.
And I don't understand, like, even taking aside everything you just said, in addition to that, there's the fact of, like, you would have gotten a better performance from all of them because they would have been more comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just the more you dig into how that stuff was filmed, it gets more and more uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's been a whole 3rd season. There's a 4th on the way. We've seen lots of content with those actors. They all still are friends. They all seem very naturally comfortable with one another. That's kind of my one, like, okay, at least it didn't affect their actual factual real life relationships with one another.
Yeah.
And I think that's at least a silver lining. And it's just a bummer because we heard about the snowball at the end of season 1, and it was something we all really wanted to see. We got to see it, and now it's just messy.
Yeah.
But at the same time, character-wise, I guess, everyone's kind of got their happily ever after, except for the fact that the Mind Flayer is watching them. And that's the season finale of season 2. So, final thoughts.
I think I always forget how much I really enjoy the season 2 finale. Like, I have it in my head, like, oh yeah, it's a really great season finale. There's a lot of things about it that I enjoy, but I think I forget just how into it I get every time I watch it. And I mean, there were small details that I forgot. Like, as we were watching it, I made a joke and you were like, that is about to happen. So I think it's one of those episodes of TV that can stand up to multiple rewatches without it being like, yeah, okay, you know, let's get to the good shit. That kind of thing is good.
Yeah.
You want my general impression? Is good.
Yeah. I remember knowing that we were getting to the end of the episode and just naturally, like, you know, we're wrapping towards the conclusion because there's a lot at the end that isn't conflict related, and we're wrapping up, and I was like, I don't want it to be over yet because I don't know that they had confirmed a season 3. So
no, they didn't. And then there was a big gap.
It was like, well, clearly they could go on. You know, they established that the Mind Flayer's still there, that it's still aware, but ultimately you could have stopped the show there, which is why I say if you were going to end after 1 or 2, 2 is where I think you should have stopped it. Because even though, like, I don't love where they leave Steve, you get the impression that, like, he's going to be okay.
Yeah, he's going to move on.
He's got this new bond with Dustin. That's clearly going to be a thing. I really liked seeing the characters just kind of exist in the world for their own sake. I tend to like second installments that do that. It's one of the reasons I've always liked Chamber of Secrets. It's one of the reasons I like The Two Towers. And I think I've heard in other people talking about why they don't like season 2. Sometimes when they're saying, I just didn't enjoy the slower burn. I didn't enjoy this. I preferred the way that they approached the plot and the character decisions. That's not something that I can argue with. That's just personal preference. So for what it's worth, I think I prefer the vibe of season 2. It's a little less anxious, I think. Season 1 is more of a mystery. You're still waiting on information on, like, what actually, on answers up until the finale. Season 2, it does not work that way.
Yeah.
With season 2, naturally, because you already know the world, you already know the characters, you already come in with a lot of contextualized knowledge. That's the same with any sequel. The difference, though, is that they don't hide information from the characters for that long.
Right.
Elle is on a bit of a mystery hunt, but even that gets found out pretty quickly.
Yeah.
There's just not a lot that you're left to figure out.
So it becomes more conflict-driven than mystery-driven. Or the conflict is not mystery-driven. It's like man versus beast or whatever instead of, you know, mystery.
I like the addition of Max and Billy. I cannot imagine Stranger Things without Max. I cannot imagine where Elle would be as a person without the arc that she went on. And I'm so glad that they let that bond with Dustin become a thing, because it's easily one of the best parts of the show.
Yeah.
And I do think that sometimes those elements get forgotten when people write off the second season.
Yeah.
And like I said at the very beginning of this season, it's about dealing with the repercussions of the first season. And so to some degree, that's kind of why I don't mind such a, like, happily ever after style ending, like in concept, if not in execution.
Right.
Because I think all these characters deserve it.
They do all deserve it. But this was that much more of a responsible way to end the season if you don't know that you're going to get more.
But I also remember thinking, like, I love this world. I love these dynamics. I want more.
Yeah.
And we got more.
And we got more. And we have more yet to come.
So my hope with this podcast is that for anyone listening who maybe didn't love season 2 as much when we started, that maybe this has helped, you know, increase the appreciation. And if you're like me and Heidi and you actually really love this season, or at least just really enjoy it and like it, that this has been validating.
Yeah.
Because I know even just talking, you know, to you about it has been validating. Like, to look at it critically. And season 2 is not without its problems. I hate that Bob dies.
Yeah.
I hate that Bob dies. And, you know, this ending with the snowball stuff is messy. I don't like the Max and 11 thing. But those to me don't actually interfere with my overall. The whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
Sure.
So, all in all, season 2 rocks.
Yeah.
So with that said, that's going to conclude our contemplations on Chapter 9, The Gate, and Season 2 of Stranger Things. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, links in the show notes. We're going to be back with season 3 at some point.
Yeah.
Not sure when yet. But this has been fun.
Thank you for listening.
Over and out.
Billy rocks up and is like, I'm intimidating. And Steve is like, not really. You know. I'm glad I amused you. And
today we will together be discussing Chapter 9, The Gate. I always think that Chapter 9 is the Mind Flayer.
Yeah.
I actually had a lot of trouble with that, with the Mind Flayer. Okay, one more time. We did it!
woohoo!